We are thrilled about our training today. As most of you know who are here, a high percentage of you are field instructors for our MSW interns, and we give a huge shout out. Thank you, we so appreciate you. I asked Brent Platt for assistance in putting together today's training, and he came up with such a fantastic group of people to train us that we decided at BYU that we wanted to expand it beyond our field instructors and open it up to all our community colleagues, and we are so pleased that we did. So welcome. We're excited to tell you about some new things that we are doing at BYU in our curriculum, and ask for your assistance in specifically training on that. And we're going to do some great ethics training and some great clinical training today. So with that introduction, let's go ahead and have our opening prayer, as is customary here at BYU. Mary Lee will give our opening prayer, and then Dr. Gordon Lim, the director of the School of Social Work, will speak for just a few seconds.
Our Father in heaven, we are very grateful to meet in such comfortable circumstances today at this wonderful university. We're grateful for all those who made sacrifices to be able to attend. We are thankful for our community of social workers. We know that thou lovest all thy children, and our desire is to help and bless them. We ask for a special blessing upon the panelists today and our speakers, and bless us that our minds and hearts will be open and that we will remember and use what we learned today. We pray for these great blessings in the name of Jesus Christ, our Savior. Amen. Amen.
All right, welcome everybody. We are very excited to have this opportunity to share with you an interesting and important topic, someone that is often very difficult, but just wanted to express appreciation to Wendy and Brent for their kind of heading this up, and the other participants and speakers that we have. I think it's going to be a very informative morning for you. Just quickly, I wanted to mention two things. First is many of you are our graduates, and so I know that most of you have heard that the passing of Kevin Merritt, one of our important clinical faculty in February. So one of the things that we are endowing the scholarship, it's still ongoing. We've got enough now in our fund to do a half scholarship, but if you, especially those of you that are alumni, would like to donate to that, you can see Charlene and she can give you the link to that. But we're still trying to get enough so we can get a full scholarship. As many of you know, he has been really instrumental the last 25 years of training many of you to be really good clinicians. And so we lost an esteemed colleague this past year. Second, with regard to the topic of the day, I just wanted to give you just a quick background of kind of what's led up to this, and then Wendy will tell you a little bit about how we're incorporating this into the curriculum currently. I'd say about 3 years ago, we brought together a number, maybe some of you were even in that, of our former students, of our field instructors and members of the community, and just asked them, went over our curriculum and asked them, where do you see some gaps? And try to maintain a really good clinical emphasis in the program, give our students really good training, and we do a good job, but are there gaps? And one of the identified themes was more trauma content in the curriculum. And so over the past couple of years, we've been trying to find and look at ways and find ways that we can add content throughout the curriculum. And just recently, I think it was the beginning of last year, we had Corey and Dave and Wendy take a trauma course, a certification type course. It was like $2,000 per person. I mean, really intensive and really good course. Wendy says it was 4, so it was more than I was expecting.
Full disclosure.
But just world-class training. And one of the thoughts that came from that is we think we can get more of this type of content to both our students and to you. And so by them taking this course, they've been able to, now we're actually developed, Wendy and a few of the faculty have developed an online trauma course that our students, we've piloted, and now it's live. And so she'll tell you a little bit about what is involved in that. And I just think that that is just, as you well know, rare in social work are you going to come up where you're not going to deal with trauma. And so we're trying to find better ways to help you and our students kind of identify some of these areas. I know many of you are experts in this area, and thank you. But I wanted to just have Wendy tell you a little bit about what this course entails and a little bit about the background. So Wendy, do you want to tell me?
Okay. These are the additions that we have made to the curriculum. First of all, as you can see, a collective competency training. That is something as a clinical faculty we felt was really important for all of us, because while we want to have separate classes, we also feel it's very important to make those linkages within all our clinical courses. As you can see in Social Work 666, which is the Advanced Practice Skills, second semester, Dr. Dennis will be teaching a trauma unit. So it's a small unit, meaning 4 or 5 weeks, doing some of the basic foundation pieces. This is some of the same things that you're going to be receiving today. The purpose of this is to help students begin to understand the importance of a trauma lens prior to any of their internships. In Social Work 622, which you guys know as the DSM class, okay, Dr. Wood teaches DSM, ICD-10 coding. He is also adding in trauma assessment, as well as he does suicide and violence assessments. In Social Work 580R is a trauma-informed clinical social work practice elective. Nothing moves as slowly as curriculum within a university. You cannot move it quickly. And so when we say we've been working on this for 3 years, we really have been working on it for 3 years. This online course is offered after their students' first full year of classes. So our students take a year of classes and then they do an internship, spring, summer, and then their second year of classes and their second internship concurrently. The students can take this class online during any semester after their first year, spring, summer, fall, or winter. Our purpose with this is to make this as easily accessible and fitting in as many schedules as possible, which is why it is an online elective. We want to be able to expose students to this in an easy fashion. What we have added is a trauma-informed clinical social work practice certificate of completion, okay? I'll go through that a little bit in a little bit more detail. But in order to get that certificate, they have to take the trauma-informed course, and then they also have to link their internship experiences and view them through a trauma-informed lens, okay? As Dr. Lim told you, a lot of the work that we have done has been with the Trauma Center at the Justice Resource Institute. We just finished taking the Traumatic Stress Studies course. In fact, I did my terminations in trauma treatment yesterday. It was my last class. So, we have also done a lot of work with the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. I know many of you use this. As we looked at where should we get our training and where should we access resources, we talked to many of you, and these are the resources you sent us to. In the online class, there are 2 NCTSM websites that are linked, nctsn.org, reading assignments, information, and specialized materials, and then learn.nctsn.org that has certification programs on it. If you guys are not familiar with these, I highly encourage you to go in. Registration is free, and they have many, many programs where you can get certificates of training. Our students, in the course of taking this online course, they get about 27 different certificates of training in trauma. These are our two main textbooks that we are going to be using and that we are currently using as it relates to trauma-informed practice. Of course, Vanderbilt's Body Keeps the Score, and Curran's 101 Trauma-Informed Interventions. We wanted to let you know what the assignments are. There are readings, video trainings, and in fact, it is highly likely that this seminar will be one of the video trainings that the students will be watching in the future. Several of you have done trainings for us in the past couple years, okay? And you signed video releases. That is why. They are part of our trainings. We talk about assignments and the certificates, and then the students have to do 2 reflection papers, which is the personal integration of what they are learning. This gives you a screenshot of what their syllabus looks like. Okay, you can see the different readings, trainings on the videos that they have to take. You will see, again, this Lee, that is Cindy Lee's presentation. Trauma Interventions is from Jess Miller from Greenhouse. Over here you can see the TFCBT and CPT certification from MUSC. And then over here, that is reflection papers. This is information from NCTSN, some of the things they have to do from there. You can see assignments, so you can kind of get a core understanding. The reason why I pulled these specific ones up for you is so you can kind of see what is included in some of that coursework. And then on the right, you can see those are all the certificates from NCTSN that they will be taking. What we hope you will see here is that when a BYU student who has taken this class, hopefully you will see that they have a pretty good grounding in foundationally for doing trauma-informed clinical social work practice. And then we hope you will expand upon that in supervision and with their internship experiences. I mentioned that there is a certificate of completion for the program. One of the big things I want to point out to you is this is not a licensure certification, okay? This tells people that our students have completed a specialized course of study, okay? It also tells you that they have done the work required in their field internships, linking trauma with their clients. One of the big things that's different about this from other certificates that we provide, as well as other certificates from other universities that we've studied, is this certificate is not agency-based. By that, let me explain. School social work certificate, they have to take the school social work class, and they have to do an internship in a school social work setting, okay? With the trauma certification, they have to take the trauma courses, but they have to look at their clients no matter what institution or agency they're working at through a trauma-informed lens, okay? So their students may be in agencies where we typically think they're going to come up in touch with trauma. Children's Justice Center, okay? Family Support and Treatment Center, Greenhouse Center. But we also are saying you need to look through a trauma lens in every agency you're at. LDS Family Services, Development Counseling Services, Utah State Prison, okay? Everywhere where you are interning. And I will tell you, it has been, in a weird, creepy sort of way, really exciting for me to see these students making these linkages through all their internships. What do they have to do for that? They have to take the class with a B or above, and they have to do at present 200 trauma-informed internship hours, okay? That number, where did we get it? We pulled it out of a hat, and we're going to see how it continues to go, okay? Internship hours that they worked. This is defined as it has to be their own client, okay? So they have to work with them, whether that is an individual or group or families. And they have to actually do some assessment. They have to do some form of treatment, whether that is individual or group treatment. And this includes staffing cases, treatment planning, and then conducting the treatment interventions. And then on their monthly internship logs, which you guys who are supervisors, you're familiar with this. They fill out their timesheet, answer questions for us. They have to answer the question, considering the 12 core concepts of traumatic stress, reflect upon what you've learned about trauma-informed social work practice this month, okay, so that we can see that integration. I wanted to share this with you. This is one of the responses that was turned in, that I graded on June 5th, okay, so this is 2 weeks ago. This does not come from one of those agencies that I mentioned before that is a typical, quote-unquote, trauma agency. This is a student. I have come to learn that the responses to trauma take so many different forms in individuals. This is consistent with core concept number 4 that is mentioned in the 12 core concepts. During the past month of my internship, I've seen and interacted with a lot of children who have experienced different types of trauma in their past. I've learned, however, that every child's reaction is different. I have some clients who have a lot of anger and express their trauma with aggression and getting angry. On the other hand, I have some clients who are more hyperactive and appear to have some element of anxiety. I've come to learn that by using the trauma-informed lens, I need to ask myself, what else is going on? What else has this child experienced in their past that may be contributing to their reactions and inability to self-regulate their emotions? Additionally, something that has always stuck out for me, and is something I strive to keep in mind when working with kids, is that it's not the event, but the experience. The meaning they attach to the event is what really matters, and what they took from it. I've also learned and seen firsthand that trauma can have a definite ripple effect on the client's family members and direct caregivers. I've had a few parents ask me for advice on what to do with their children because their typical methods of discipline are not working and their child is out of control. It's been a learning experience and helped solidify in my own mind the way that trauma affects a child's development and reaction responses to different situations. Consistent with concept number 5 in the article, danger and safety are the core concerns for those who've experienced severe trauma. I think having the trauma-informed lens has helped me to understand the reactions of children as being their way of protecting themselves in face of perceived threat. So the child that hits another kid impulsively may be doing so because they thought they were going to be seriously hurt, not because they want to be mean or can't control themselves. When you put kids' responses into the context of the trauma they have experienced, it makes more sense. As my supervisor told me, and has stuck in my mind ever since, people do the best they can with what they've gone through. Maladaptive or adaptive, it's the best that they can do. Okay, I don't know what you guys think, but when I read that, I went, yes! Okay, that is what we are trying to accomplish with our trauma-informed social work class. So with that background introduction, let's get going in our training. I want to, today the agenda, we are going to have, Brent Platt is going to speak with us, then we're having a panel discussion, and then after that we're going to have a short break. After that, Kara Payton will do a concepts and clinical competencies for trauma-informed practice. Great. I didn't see you before. Okay, so with that introduction, make sure also after the seminar, the training this morning, that you stop at the desk on your way to lunch, okay? Pick up your CEU certificates, and there are several different community resources and informational flyers that our speakers have brought for you that will be very, very helpful for you. So make sure and pick up one for each of those. So if we can have Brent and Tracey, Deondra, and Dr. Brooks come on up, and I will go ahead and introduce you. And boy, that light really turned off there, didn't it, when we did that? Let's go like this. Okay. Okay, so let me do some introductions for you. Brent Platt. Brent works closely with the Division of Human Services Executive Leadership and DHS directors to build partnerships with stakeholders and policymakers to help families obtain greater access to services and increase positive outcomes. Previously, Brent served as the director of the Division of Child and Family Services from March 2010 to September 2017. He began working for DHS in 1993 as a caseworker in Blanding and also as a clinical social worker at the Utah State Prison for a time. Brent is committed to promoting child safety and well-being by working with the children and parents using a trauma-informed approach. He graduated with a Master's of Social Work from California State University, Sacramento in 1993. He and his wife are the proud parents of 5 children. And I do have to tell you, Brent is a lot of the impetus for this training and for pulling everybody together. So huge thank you. Tracey has been with the Attorney General's Office since 1994 and is the administrator for the Utah Children's Justice Center program, where she oversees the state's 23 children's justice centers. Under her leadership, the program has expanded services to 28 of Utah's 29 counties, implemented measures to promote equity and accountability, and become a strong voice for citizens on Utah's Capitol Hill. As the coordinator for the Utah chapter of the National Children's Alliance, she co-chaired NCA's chapter collaborative work group and serves on its public policy collaborative work group. She received the Outstanding State Chapter Leader Award from NCA in 2012 and the Anne Framuth Child Advocate of the Year Award from Prevent Child Abuse Utah in 2016. She currently serves on several boards, including the Utah Sexual Violence Council, the Utah Coalition for Protecting Childhood, the Utah Trafficking in Persons Task Force, and is a member of the Utah Women's Forum. Tracey grew up in rural southeastern Utah and is a graduate of the University of Utah and Westminster College. Welcome, Tracey. Deondra Brown Nielsen. Deondra Brown performs as a member of the piano chamber group, the Five Browns. She has released 6 albums, several of which have topped the Billboard classical charts for many weeks. Her 7th album is set for release in 2019. Deondra received her training at the Juilliard School and has performed in elite venues across the world, including Carnegie Hall in New York City, Century Hall in Tokyo, and the Grand National Theater in Beijing. She's appeared on The Tonight Show, Oprah, Good Morning America, The Today Show, as well as in the New York Times, People, and Entertainment Weekly, among others. Deondra and her sister Desiree formed the Foundation for Survivors of Abuse to help educate the public on the overwhelming problem of sexual abuse. They work to provide hope and encouragement for survivors by ensuring they are supported and protected under the law. Through FSA, Deondra worked on national legislation that was introduced in 2015 with U.S. Senator Harry Reid, S. 2397. This legislation is set to be reintroduced in 2018 by Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. Quite active in the political scene in Utah, Deondra has worked closely with lawmakers across the aisle to promote many bills, including the passage of sexual abuse prevention in elementary schools and the removal of civil statutes of limitation for sexual abuse. She collaborated with the Utah Division of Child and Family Services and the Attorney General's Office as a spokesperson for One with Courage Utah, a program to encourage reporting of these crimes. Deondra also serves as the co-chair of the Utah Coalition for Protecting Childhood. In addition to her musical and advocacy efforts, Deondra works on projects for the Utah Children's Justice Center program. Deondra resides in Salt Lake City, Utah. Welcome. Dr. Brooks Keeshin. Brooks Keeshin, MD, is a clinical researcher in the Division of Child Protection and Family Health at the University of Utah and Safe and Healthy Families at Primary Children's Hospital. Dr. Keeshin is a child abuse pediatrician and child psychiatrist. Dr. Keeshin completed medical school at the University of Cincinnati, residency in pediatrics, general and child psychiatry at the University of Utah, and fellowship training in child abuse pediatrics at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. Dr. Keeshin is certified in pediatrics and child abuse pediatrics by the American Board of Pediatrics and certified in general as well as child and adolescent psychiatry by the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology. Dr. Keeshin provides inpatient and outpatient child abuse pediatrics consultation at Primary Children's Hospital, as well as outpatient psychiatric services for children and families with a history of abuse or trauma. Dr. Keeshin's research interests include acute and long-term neurobiological changes associated with exposure to child maltreatment, and 2, early clinical interventions to decrease the risk of PTSD and other psychological distress among children exposed to maltreatment and violence. Dr. Keeshin has received research support from the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry and was a Doris Duke Fellow for the Promotion of Child Well-Being. He currently serves on the Board of Directors for the Academy on Violence and Abuse and is a member of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry Committee on Child Maltreatment and Violence. Welcome, Dr. Keeshin. So go ahead. Brent is going to speak and moderate our panel, and we will have 2 microphones after the speakers have finished, after the panelists have finished their portion. We will have 2 walking microphones. Marilee will be on this side and Charlene will be on this side so that we can take questions from the audience for our panel members. So with that, I turn it over to you guys. Thank you.
So, Yeah, I don't even belong up here with these guys. Wendy read my, she's like, works for DCFS, works for DHS, blah, 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 blah. And then you listen to what they're doing, and it's an honor to be with these guys. It's an honor to be their friend. I just love them. They're great. So I thought, yesterday I was reading the news, as I tend to do, and it's really bad for me. And I saw a headline. It was a CNN headline. It says, headline stress disorder, how to cope with the anxiety caused by the 24/7 news cycle. I thought, we all are swimming in a sea of trauma right now, it feels like to me. We had a couple of, we had a lawmaker who was going to be on the panel today, and it actually, his schedule worked. It worked for him during, for the original time, the date that it was set for this meeting. But when it was changed, he couldn't make it. And the lawmakers are actually, they were invited to the White House today. So several state lawmakers and county commissioners are back at DC. And I realize that this is being recorded, but I do want to say I hope there are no cages at the White House, because they need to come home. We need them. So that was bad. That was really bad. But I just needed to say that. I say that because we're really lucky in Utah to have lawmakers and policymakers who are really passionate about these issues. And I think that's one of the reasons we even can have this convening today, is because there's a lot of movement around trauma and becoming trauma informed, and just kind of changing our framework. You all have a definition. You all have your own definition of what trauma is, right? Like professionally, you've read books, you've read articles, and so you all have kind of your definition. You know trauma when you see it. And for me, it could be a really complicated definition, or it's narrowed down to three, but the ACEs study, right? It has to do with abuse, neglect, or household dysfunction. Those are three really broad categories of what create trauma. And professionally, we all know, we know how like what this student said, that each person kind of handles traumatic situations differently. Everybody has their own way of doing things. So I thought I would, as I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking personally. The other day I was, so I'm LDS, and so I'm involved with some of the issues that go on in our neighborhood, and with an assignment I have with my local congregation. And it was ironic to me. It was really ironic that over the past 6 weeks, I've met and visited with 3 different families just in my little neighborhood, very normal neighborhood. 3 different families who have shared with me that they've had involvement with DCFS, maybe not in Utah, but in other states. And that surprised me. And I don't know why it surprised me, because really at this point in my life, nothing should surprise me, but it surprised me. And one individual, one family in particular, it was really interesting to me. I was visiting with him and his son, and we have boys that are about the same age, and we were talking, and I was getting to know him, and I'm doing my social work stuff, just kind of probing and trying to understand and engage and all that stuff. And I said, "So, where's Mom?" Just curious. And the dad looked at the son and he said, "Do you want to tell him?" The son said, "Mom chose drugs over me." I went, "Oh, I know, it's just so sad." And then he explained his story. He said, my girlfriend and I were both doing drugs, and we were really heavy into it. She was pregnant. I stopped. And of course, this is his version of the story. I don't know all the facts. So I stopped, and he goes, and I asked her to stop, and she wouldn't. And he said, just when she had the baby, he shared the story, and he didn't have much contact with his child until the child was involved with foster care. And then the authorities notified Dad. They got a hold of Dad. And he had been clean and sober for however many years. And so he was able to have custody of this boy. It was cute. It was a very touching and tender story. And so the other part of this is in our little ward, our LDS ward, we're running around trying to figure out how we can support this family, right? Because they're kind of on edge. I mean, economically, all of the trauma-inducing factors, right? Economically, there's chaos in the home, blah 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 blah. Dad works early morning shift, and he has this sweet little boy who's home from in the morning till about 2:30 in the afternoon. So my neighbor says, well, I'll have him police. So my boy and this other boy go over to the house and they're pulling weeds. And it was really cute, because I said, well, it was probably about time for lunch. And so they put their shovels down and they went and they waited by the car, because it was, they had put in a solid 2.5 hours, right? So it was time for lunch, So we go down to the little cafe, our little Taco Amigo, because we love Taco Amigo. And I tell them, I say, pick anything from the kids menu, the kids menu. And so my boy says, well, I want this, and the other kid says, I'll take that. And then he looked at the bigger menu and he said, I think I want the big burrito. And I said, so anything from the kids menu, right? Because I'm a social worker and I'm going to set really clear boundaries. Anything from the kids menu. So he says, okay, well, I'll take this. And so he takes he picks the item, and we have a great little visit, and I almost tear up because he sees a friend and the friend doesn't acknowledge him, and it's just really sad. So a few days later, I'm talking to this buddy who's hiring my boy and this other boy to weed, and I had told Mike, I said, so when you take him to lunch, make sure you set boundaries, because he's going to try to get a bunch of food from you. And I wasn't that flippant, but So we were talking the other night, and he said, so Brent, here's the deal. We went to lunch, and he told me, he said, I want to give my dad lunch. Can I get the big burrito and I'll split it with him? That's why the kid wanted the big burrito. He didn't want it because he was being stingy or selfish. That's how it came off to me. He wanted it because he's like, I can get home, I can put it in the fridge, and I can give my dad half of this big burrito. So we don't know how kids respond to all of the issues that are going on in their lives. But when we look through things through a trauma lens, like what Wendy was talking about, it tends to help us have a little bit more compassion about this. And I was just fascinated by how stupid I was. Right? I mean, I'm not fascinated, I'm kind of embarrassed. But I'm going to do things a little bit different. Anyway, so that's my anecdotal story. Professionally, we know how it works, but personally, clearly, I don't. As I think about these three kids, or these three families who are involved with who have been involved with child welfare over the past 20 years, and some of these had adult kids and stuff. But I think in Utah, and I'm sure you know this, excuse me, but in Utah, DCFS identifies about 30 kids a day. So 365 days a year we averages out about 30 kids a day who have been victims of abuse or neglect. So, for those of you who have children in elementary school, or grandchildren in elementary school, or nephews or nieces in elementary school, stop by your kids' class, look around. It's an entire classroom of elementary school kids every day that have been abused or neglected that we know about in Utah. That obviously isn't all the kids, right? But that's what we know about. Those are the issues that rise to our level. Depending on who you talk to, anywhere between 20,000 and 80,000 kids in Utah are living with grandparents or their relatives at any given time. How many of you knew that? How many of you knew that there were so many kids living with relatives? It's you knew. It's fascinating to me. I had no idea. That's why we love the Children's Services Society and their Grandfamilies program. About 58,000 children in Utah are living in poverty. 58,000 kids in Utah. That's the size of pick a community. That's the size of many of our communities. And then probably the most sobering, I mean, these are all sobering, but probably the most sobering is that Utah has the 5th highest rate of suicide in the country. That was just in the news. Right? Seems like I understand that the trend has leveled off, but that's horrible. It's just horrible to think about that. I think all of these reasons and more, right, are why lawmakers are, I'll tell you what, all of these reasons and the folks on the panel are why lawmakers are really interested in this issue, because people are having the courage and they have the passion to step forward and to engage with policymakers and to talk about these issues. I think in Utah, and I don't know Deondra and Tracey, but I would say that if we were to compare what we're doing and just kind of the passion and compassion that our lawmakers have, I would hold us up to any state. And we have so many people who care about kids and care about families. And in Utah, it's kind of easy, superficially, to be critical. We can't. There's not a lot of funding for child welfare and blah 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 blah. But I'll tell you that in Utah, the bulk of the funding that goes to child welfare actually comes from state money. And in many other states, they depend much more on the federal government for their funding. But in Utah, I mean, really policymakers really do, they try to put their money where their mouths are in regards to child welfare. But I wanted to just talk to you quickly, just share some of the legislation that's been passed, and I'm trying to make sure I don't go over, because I'm not even the opening act. Like I'm filler until we get to the panel, because these are amazing. In 2017, Representative Ed Red and Senator Todd Weiler, two amazing advocates. I'm sad that Representative Red is leaving the legislature. But they sponsored it's HCR 10, which is a concurrent resolution. It's a concurrent resolution encouraging identification and support of traumatic child experiences survivors. So it's what it is it's a resolution that encourages state agencies and other entities to become trauma aware, trauma informed, and then to coordinate better on how we work with families. Because we all know that if there's a family involved with DCFS, there's a pretty good chance they may be involved with DWS or might be involved with other services, and vice versa. And I will tell you that if you want to be inspired, I think, because I was, go to his testimony. It's February 1st, 2017. It's his testimony to the Health and Human Services Standing Committee, so it was during a legislative session. And Representative Red absolutely nailed it when he spoke. Because I'll bet, Brooks, you may have been there. I know you were involved with the resolution, but I don't know if you were there at that meeting. But I know Deondra, you were there, and I bet Tracey was there. But this is he's a medical doctor who's very much an advocate for marginalized populations, and he says he's encouraging these folks the committee to support this bill and get it out on the floor so they can all vote on it. And one of the state anyway spends probably 15 minutes on his testimony, and it really is. I really would encourage you to go. But the whole point of it is let's encourage state agencies to get involved. By the time he was done, the other lawmakers who were on this panel, on this committee, they said, they looked at each other, remember, and they said, let's require it. Like, this is a no-brainer. Like, we had no idea how much trauma affected children and families, so let's just require it. And actually, Representative Red had to pull him back and say, well, hang on, let's just encourage him, and then this will be step one, and then we'll keep moving, we'll move forward with each session. And so it was really touching to me how passionate he was, but also how passionate these policymakers were. One of the statements he said, and it really summed it up for me, he said, bottom line, and this is a guy who is just really, really, really smart. He's like these guys, Dr. Keeshin. But he said, the deal is, we need to help folks not have a long-term disastrous life. That's what we've got to do. That's our goal. Our goal is to help people have resources so that they don't have to have a long-term disastrous life. The resolution was passed not just with the two sponsors, but 24 additional sponsors. So 24 of the lawmakers said, we want to sign on. We want to be on that bill when it passes. It was amazing, and that doesn't always happen. This last session, in the 2018 session, House Bill 326, Intergenerational Poverty Initiative, I think that was sponsored by Representative Brent and then Senator Howard Stevenson. And among other things it does, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Intergenerational Poverty IGP, the Intergenerational Poverty Commission, which is in place by statute. But what this does is it gives about $1 million to the Department of Workforce Services to fund some pilot sites, and they're looking at, I think, mostly rural. I'm not sure, but I think some rural sites. And the reason I'm telling you this is because they're gonna for counties, because it's for counties and for kind of intergenerational poverty committees in these different smaller areas. They're going to get extra points for if they have a trauma, kind of a trauma focus in their proposal, because they want to make sure that we're looking at poverty through this trauma lens, right? That we're looking at kind of all the underlying factors. And House Bill 177, trauma-informed justice provisions, and that's really, let's be honest, that's Deondra's bill. I don't know that she knew it at the time, but when people approached her, like, Deondra, what do we do? What do we do? So this Representative Ken Ivory and Senator Luz Escamilla, two other champions. Senator Escamilla is just amazing. It'll create a multidisciplinary trauma-informed committee at the state level. Look at ways that we can build into systems a process to help victims recover from the trauma they've experienced, right? It's going to include state agencies, education, universities, advocates, law enforcement, nonprofits, Deondra. Better include her, or I will fight it. But it's just amazing what they're doing. At the national level, the Families First Prevention Services Act, that was recently passed. That was passed, I mean, Utah was very involved with that, with Senator Hatch's office for about 4 years. And originally when they ran it through, it didn't pass. And then about a year later it did, it finally went through. And it had been not watered down, but changed significantly. But still the focus is on freeing up some funding that previously has only been for foster care, and allowing states to be creative with some of this funding to be used for prevention efforts and in-home services, right? So that we can, right? We want to move upstream and keep kids out of foster care. And one of the requirements is that the states will have to, as they award contracts, that they're going to help, providers will have to have a trauma-informed approach with how they work with families and children. It's just great stuff. So let me just wrap this up here. We know that as practitioners and educators and advocates and leaders, we really do have to work together. And this really isn't just kind of a professional issue, right? This is a community issue, it's a neighborhood issue, and this is me as a dad or as a neighbor or as a faith leader or whatever role we have. This is about how we support families who are struggling, whatever that struggle is, whether the struggle rises to the level of the state involvement or Children's Justice Center involvement, or whether it's getting involved with folks who are in crisis and offer them supports and encouragement and resources before they fall off that cliff. That's really what this is about, and that's what this forum is about. You're all a bunch of professionals, but you're professionals who are passionate about the issue. SAMHSA, one of the SAMHSA papers, the concept of trauma and guidance for a trauma-informed approach says, it's become evident that addressing trauma requires a multi-pronged, multi-agency public health approach, inclusive of public education and awareness, prevention and early identification, and effective trauma-specific assessment and treatment. In order to maximize the impact of these efforts, they need to be provided in an organizational or community contact that is trauma-informed. That is, based on the knowledge and understanding of trauma and its far-reaching implications. So I'll just close with one example and two challenges. One, United Way. I was at a meeting over at Utah County's United Way yesterday, and Everyday Strong. It's a new initiative they have throughout the county. Anybody heard of this? Okay, well, all of you are going to get this pamphlet when you pick up your CEUs at the end. But it's an initiative focused that's built around trauma awareness and then with helping families to build resilience, so that they can kind of deal with some of the issues that come their way. And it's for parents, teachers, neighbors, and other trusted adults. So I trust you, so you're all going to get one. But it's about helping children feel safe and secure, connected, and confident and valued. So I would encourage you to pick this up. I know they're working on even a shorter version, kind of a more abbreviated version that we can give to folks as well. Because I don't know that, I think everybody recognizes that, I don't know, somebody in crisis may not be able to read a 15-page handbook. But professionals and educators can, and then we can kind of glean from this. And then, but United Way, they'll be working on some other stuff that will help, that we can give out to families who may be in crisis. Because the reality is, all of these meetings are great, total waste of time if we're not getting the information to the parents and the kids. And the people who are with these folks when we're not. So two challenges. So within our communities, and especially here in Utah County, right, let's get together, let's keep this momentum going. The universities, especially the faith communities, which I think we don't have a lot. I don't know how much coordination there is in Utah County with the faith communities, but we need to do a better job with that. Mental health, state agencies, districts, and let's continue to collaborate so we can help equip professionals, all of these folks, and especially equip parents so they can help their children, and we can help them. So this is a great little pamphlet I want you to get it. And the other thing is work with your lawmakers, and work with your city council and your county commissioners, and work with community leaders. Like, this is not something, I will tell you, when I first got my job with DCFS, that my biggest fear was lawmakers. I had no idea how to work with lawmakers. You only see stuff on the news. All it takes is about 1 or 2 phone calls, and some are more receptive than others, but for the most part, people are really open to what their constituents have to say. And all it takes is just a couple of phone calls for a lawmaker, a policymaker to say, that Greg Robinson, he's bald, but he's right there in the middle. I can pick him up. He seems to know a lot about this issue. So during the next session, if something comes up, I'm going to call Greg because he's my expert. So become experts to your policymakers. Time's up. Thought I could be more, yeah, but I set up for 20 minutes. So do that. Like, don't be afraid or don't be shy. But get involved. Get involved with what the Children's Justice Centers are doing, and Family Support Center. But this is it's kind of it's a good opportunity for us to really take the bull by the horns, as it were, and address this issue and not just turn our agencies into trauma aware and trauma informed, but to help turn our communities into communities that care and communities that support families. So thank you for your time. Okay, now for the fun stuff. So what we're going to do is for the next little while, and I'm not going to do a timer because I don't want it to go off in the middle of a statement. That would just be till about maybe 10:40ish or somewhere around there. We're gonna have we're gonna open up questions and for our panel. So here's what we're gonna do. Deondra and Tracey and Dr. Keeshin are gonna take some time to kind of share with you why they're here and why they're passionate about this issue. And then once they share their opening statements or their story, then we're going to open this up for questions. And we're going to have a mic on this side, and we're going to have a mic on that side. And then I'm going to try to keep track of whose hands are up. But I'm telling you, you're not going to have a better group of people to ask questions to than these three. And I would ask that if you want to make a statement, keep it brief, because this was really about questions and answers. So definitely interested in your thoughts, for sure. But if you could end whatever it is you're saying with a question for the panelists, that would be really, really great. We totally want to pick their brains today. So, okay, so Deondra, are you okay to start? Or, okay.
All right. I'm Deondra, and I'm honored to be here today. And when Brent calls and asks you if you'll participate, it is definitely hard to say no. So I'm here. I love the fact that I'm here speaking about trauma when all my education is in music. My brothers and sisters and myself, we, as you heard in the intro, we perform together on 5 pianos in different venues across the world. The 5 of us are only 6.5 years apart, so we're very close in age. And each of us have been playing the piano since we were 3 years old. And music has always just been a part of our lives, like the focus and our passion, what we knew that we wanted to do with our lives. And as siblings, we've always been so close. We knew everything about each other. We hung out together. And so it made sense that eventually we would be playing concerts together. My sisters and I even shared a room growing up together and went off to school at Juilliard and continued to share a room. We would confide in each other. We would tell, our deepest secrets to one another and confide and be there for each other. So when we started playing concerts together on 5 pianos, it was a dream, honestly, to be able to share this passion, this love of music with people all over the world. And here we are 14 years later, still performing, still enjoying the music, and still actually loving each other, even though we spend a lot of time together. We've had the amazing experience of walking the Great Wall of China together and visiting the ancient city of Ephesus in Turkey, all after playing concerts in these wonderful countries. I would have never imagined that I'd be able to have those kinds of experiences. Over those 14 years, we've seen each other get married, and some of us start families, and we've grown from young adults who were breakout musicians into adults who are now professionals and considered in the business to be veterans, which to me just feels like another word for old, but I'll take it, I guess. But 5 years into performing, in 2007, we realized that our lives were never going to be the same. My sister Desi and I, she's only 14 months older than me, so we were always thought of as twins. We went off to school at Juilliard together. I remember when she got married, it was very traumatic because I was alone. But we've always just told each other everything. And one night in a hotel room, we were talking about our lives and about the fact that my father was managing the 5 of us, and we just felt like we were losing control of our personal lives, and the scheduling was getting out of hand. So we just started talking, and she alluded to the fact that she felt like something was just off, like he didn't have our best interests at heart. And so as we were talking, she asked me some very pointed questions, and to her credit, she was not deterred by my surface answers. So eventually she asked me point blank, did Dad sexually abuse you? And I still skirted around the question, and she asked me again, and she asked me again. And finally, I said the words that I had never said out loud before. Yes, I was sexually abused by our father. And here we were in our upper 20s, early 30s, finally saying the words out loud to each other. And you think how close we were. We'd shared rooms. We had poured our deepest secrets to each other, and we had never said anything about it. And eventually, the news became public about our abuse, and I realized that this was a time to make a decision of whether I was comfortable enough addressing it, or whether I wanted to keep my privacy and be able to continue to perform and do the best I could in a business of entertainment to skirt that. Eventually, I decided that I wanted to speak out about it, and that it was important to me that other victims not feel alone and feel shame and fear as I had growing up. And so here I am, 7 years later, from when my father entered prison for his crimes. And I'm proud of the fact that I can say that I'm a sexual abuse survivor and not feel shame or fear, and know that there are so many more of us out there than I would have ever predicted. So studies show that it takes the average victim well into their 40s or 50s before they can disclose for the first time. A study came out last month, actually, in Johns Hopkins University that said the cost victims pay over the course of their lifetime is somewhere between almost $300,000 and $1 million. And these costs come from medical expenses, obviously mental health experiences, job loss, loss of productivity, and many, many other factors. And it's believed that these numbers are gravely underestimated because, as we know, only about 1 in 10 victims even come forward to begin with. And I get excited to see the services and the support that is offered to victims now. I look back on when I was a teenager in the midst of abuse, how I felt so alone. And I think how far we've come since the 90s. How many people are talking about this subject, and how many people are willing to put their money where their mouth is and move forward and speak out on behalf of victims. I remember the first time I heard about the ACE study, and I was so afraid to take the test. I was afraid of what it would say. I was afraid of the results. I was afraid that in my own mind, I would label myself as damaged beyond repair. But when I finally, probably a year and a half later, decided to actually take the test, it was shocking to me that it was the complete opposite of what I had thought. It helped me to understand so much more about myself and to understand why I feel certain emotions at certain times and why I react in different ways than I maybe would have expected. And it just helped me to understand that with everything that I've been through, it's important to continue to be patient with myself and to be patient with others who have suffered similarly. So, in my experiences of testifying for legislation at the Capitol, I was up there testifying on behalf of civil statute of limitations for victims who come forward, to give them the opportunity to have the flexibility to come forward when they're ready instead of on a specific time schedule. Anyway, it was the first time that I spoke about the very personal effects of abuse. And I had a very well-meaning individual come up to me afterwards, and he said, "But the abuse doesn't affect you. You seem just fine." And it was an eye-opener to me because I thought, if victims look at me and assume that I don't have effects, that there must be some anomaly there, that's not fair to victims. And so I realized the importance of continuing my message of hope and of moving forward, but also being willing to talk about the difficult things. I have the bad days just like anybody else. I have health concerns that will probably permanently be there in one way or another. There are those days where it's difficult to keep going and to keep being out there talking about it, but I realize the importance of being there. I've been fortunate enough to have the constant support of my siblings, which I know is not often the case for many families. My siblings have wonderful spouses, and my sweet husband have all been there through everything. And I continue to play concerts and record albums and do the things that I've dreamed of. But I still battle day in and day out with the effects of the abuse, believe me. But that's the comforting part of studying up on trauma. You can work through the things that have happened in your past, and you can find ways of counteracting the effects of the abuse. That was so empowering to me, to not think that because this was done to me as a child, that I'm forced to deal with it and I'm stuck with all these consequences of it, that I can actually have some sort of control in working to counteract the things that were done to me, that I'm not a lost cause. And all those hours of practicing day in and day out since I was 3 years old quite possibly could have been helping in my healing process. The 5 of us have talked about this, about the fact that we were essentially living the power of music every single day. And now you see studies, by Dr. Bruce Perry and others about the power of music quite literally on our brains and the healing process. And it's fascinating to us to think that while we were setting these goals and practicing every single day, we were also very likely counteracting the abuse. So, as a normal person who's come to understand about trauma and the need for us to move forward in a trauma-informed way, I can honestly tell you that I'm starting to see this movement take root here in Utah, and I'm proud of that. I was in New York State working on statute of limitation reform there, and it was eye-opening to me to see the difference in working in the New York State Capitol and working here. We are very, very fortunate, like Brent was saying, to have legislators who not only want to do everything in their power to protect children, but want to continue understanding about trauma and understanding its effects. And to think that we come from a state where a trauma-informed resolution passed, and not only passed, but was even drafted. We made quite a statement by saying that as a state, we are dedicated to understanding trauma. And in working with Representative Ivory recently on this work group for trauma-informed provisions for the state, I realized how many different individuals and agencies are not only invested in trauma, but are out there doing it already. So it's exciting to see everybody work together on behalf of victims and children and our communities to make sure that we understand and support victims in the way that we would hope. So my life has taken a very different turn than I would have expected, but it is amazing to think that I have two passions: music and protecting children and victims. And the power of music assists my other passion. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to share my experiences.
She's always a tough act to follow. But we've become quite close over the years, and so I'm always thrilled when I get opportunities to appear with her, and I was happy. Again, Brent, it's hard to say no to Brent. And I was happy to pinch hit because the senator could not be here. I'm sitting here in a room full of practitioners, but I'm hoping that by the time you leave today, you will also leave as ambassadors for this work. I am not a practitioner. My background is actually in communication. My master's is in communication, and I've spent the better part of my 25-year career really helping to build and maintain systems to improve the response to victims, ranging from domestic violence in my earlier career to drug-facilitated sexual assault, and for the past 15 years, specifically for children through my role with the Children's Justice Centers. So first of all, I want to find out how many of you are familiar with the Children's Justice Center model? Hold your hand. So quite a few of you, and I'm looking over here in the corner because we're actually lucky enough to have both current and past staff of the CJC here in Utah County. Raise your hands high. If you end up having questions about what happens on the ground, those are the folks to talk to. Because they are doing the tough work daily. And we just feel so blessed to have staff now in 23 locations throughout the state that provide these vital services. I think back to what the response was like before there was the Children's Justice Center model or the Children's Advocacy Center model as it's known in other states. And imagine a child, picture a 5-year-old who has maybe disclosed something, being taken then to a police station and being plunked down in a seat in a room full of really noisy detectives, other suspects being interviewed, and being asked to share something that difficult. In that setting, probably talking to someone who has no training in how to forensically and sensitively question a child. That was the world we lived in 30 years ago. And I just do have to give props to our state legislature because when they learned of the model out of Alabama, they had tremendous, I think, vision and foresight because they decided that they were going to make it a government-based program here in the state of Utah, and they were going to essentially systematically develop the model throughout the state. So we now have more than 900 centers throughout the country. But that's not necessarily like evenly spread out. You still have huge areas in many states with no services. We've continued to have amazing support from the state legislature to ensure that every child has reasonable access. When you mentioned, I grew up in rural Utah, and it was a proud moment when we were able to actually open a center down in San Juan County, where I'm from, and then develop a team serving part of the Navajo Nation, because resources down there are few and far between. Even as we've watched the model grow over the years, some areas have been slower to evolve than others. And I was just recently back in Washington, D.C., and I was talking with a colleague of mine who works with our national membership organization, the National Children's Alliance. And we kind of shudder to think about even what we considered to be best practice 20, 25 years ago, particularly in the realm of mental health. But we both had to acknowledge we were working with what was known at the time, and that so much has changed. We're learning more every day. The research that is emerging, but it means then that we have, I think, a moral and ethical obligation to stay on top of that and make sure that that is integrated into our work. So I mentioned earlier, I'm not a practitioner, I am more of an ambassador. I spend a lot of my time trying to promote both big P policy, as I call it, more in the world of actual legislation and laws, and small p policy, that being internal policies and procedures that will support our work and really reflect best practice. You heard earlier some of the real, I think, progressive legislation that has happened in Utah, and we are very fortunate here, but we still encounter situations where you see that there's a lack of understanding, and I don't fault people for that, because if you don't come from this world, you're not going to know everything. And every day we encounter on Capitol Hill people who are trying to do the best with what they have. They are part-time legislators, they are part-time commissioners, they are part-time city council members. And so they really do rely on experts to bring them and provide them information. So I find myself being kind of that translator, trying to bridge those two worlds. When it comes to helping them understand trauma, I look at it this way. I picture an iceberg. We tend to look at the tip of an iceberg, and that's like the presenting problem or the presenting symptom, and you're like trying to tackle that. Think about everything that is beneath the water, everything going on that you do not see. And that's how I imagine, because I'm kind of a visual person, the impact of trauma. And I want to give you a really solid example, hopefully from a couple of years ago with a particular bill. I got a call. I was at a conference in San Diego because, I thought actually it was going to be a quiet session for a change and I could attend this conference I'd never been to. And I was told, you need to get home. This particular bill was designed to give judges discretion when sentencing. When you look at really the most heinous crimes against children, there have been minimum mandatory sentences. And the impetus for this particular bill was a case involving an 18-year-old with two 13-year-old girls. And there was concern that what was perceived by many as just a dating relationship, even though legally these 13-year-olds could not consent, that this was resulting in felonies against this young man, and that just simply wasn't fair, and that there needed to be some discretion. I saw this as an opportunity to do education. We know even today, people make assumptions when they hear about a 13-year-old engaging in sexual activity. We know that. Certainly back, in my time and others in this room, that was just the assumption. Someone that was promiscuous, you didn't think much beyond that. But it was an opportunity for us to share with lawmakers what we knew about sexual abuse, what we knew about ACEs, what we knew, including a study that I was able to share at the time, that if you had a child that engaged in sexual activity by the time they were 13, they were 90.5 times, not 9, 90.5 times more likely to have sexual abuse in their history. So I urged them, when they saw these types of circumstances, to not just look at the tip of the iceberg, but to consider what might be in that individual's past, and to think more broadly about what might be going on when they're making such significant policy decisions that affect so many. To the sponsor's credit, he was really receptive in talking about changes to the bill, which were made, and now when we're up there on the Hill, he's friendly and he sees us as a resource when these issues come up in the future. But we realize sometimes we have to mobilize really quickly, and we have to rely heavily on science and evidence-based practice to educate others, because they don't always know what we know. And I'll say we, I use that term very lightly because I don't know what you know. We are so dependent on people like Dr. Keeshin, who we use, we don't use you, but we rely on you heavily. You may feel that way sometimes. To help inform our work. With the Children's Justice Center model, we have teams of people that respond on every case. But guess what? We only have one, mental health slot on the team. I mean, it can be multiple, but we have other disciplines at the table that don't know what you know. We have law enforcement, we have child protective services, we have prosecutors. And sometimes it's tough to get any one of us who, we have a specific discipline to embrace the knowledge of others, or to help apply it to our work. That's really, though, the value of the model, because you are pulling in collectively all this expertise to help make informed decisions about the case, but more importantly, decisions about the child. And what I've seen in my time with this work is movement where, yes, we still are very focused on investigation and prosecution, no question. But we also know that in many of our cases, those cases will never see the inside of a courtroom. That doesn't mean that we can't attend to that child's mental health needs and get them on a path to healing. When you're looking for a trauma lens, you're also thinking not just about that child, but you're thinking about the broader family unit. I can't tell you how many families come to the center and the caregiver discloses their own history. So now you have to factor that in to how you treat them, not just that child, but that entire family unit. But you need to do that, because if you want that child to succeed, you need to help that entire family succeed. And again, if you're thinking too narrowly, you're going to either miss those opportunities or disregard those opportunities. I have to say, Wendy, as I'm listening to you talk about the curriculum you have, I wanted to stand up and applaud, because not only does it contain a lot of what we already have integrated into our work with the Children's Justice Centers, NCTSN as a partner. We rely on primaries to train clinicians for us regularly on TFCBT. We have Yale University coming out next week to train some of our clinicians on CFTSI therapy. We have other partners that contribute to our work and share their expertise with us, because our teams don't have that expertise necessarily, particularly in some of our rural areas. I mean, we're really trying to foster and cultivate that, whether they're in Logan or Blanding or Cedar City, and so it's a really exciting time. So I just want to leave you with this thought, okay? Envision a world where you are not the only ones who are trauma-informed. Envision a world where our institutions of higher learning are training our future journalists and our teachers and our economists to understand these principles. I'm still hopeful that maybe by the time I finally hang it up, that maybe we will have implemented some of that. But I'm hoping then that I can enlist the help of those of you in the room to maybe push that message forward. I challenge you to share your insight and your expertise with those who do not have it, but need to know at least the basics, because each and every one of us, we're encountering individuals every day that have some sort of traumatic experience in their background. We just have to take a moment and think about what lies beneath that surface. Thank you.
So, good morning. Thank you for Brent for inviting me. I want to echo everybody else's response to Brent, which is when he asked, we come. And it's always an honor and a pleasure to do so. So I wanted to, there's not a lot actually for a child psychiatrist and child abuse doctor to add to what's already been said, but I want to kind of play off a couple of things. So Brent said, you know trauma when you see it. Deondra talked about someone coming up to her and saying, but you seem just fine. And Tracey talked about trauma is like the tip of the iceberg. And so I want to share with you just a couple of things, and please cut me off. Please. Never tell a child psychiatrist, we'll just talk as long as you want. Bad idea. But so I didn't start as a child psychiatrist. I actually, in undergrad, got a minor in Montessori education, 3 to 6 year olds. And I got to do student teaching for a full year as part of that my senior year. I spent more time doing Montessori education, Montessori classes than I did doing any of those pre-med things or really anything else. I graduated actually with a Spanish major because you had to graduate with something. Don't ask me to speak Spanish. What I loved about Montessori education was that Dr. Maria Montessori was a physician. And she looked at the development of children and the interaction of children with their environment as this critical interaction that we had the ability to either kind of let go as it goes or to improve and enhance to maximize the child's potential. So in her writing, she talked about how this child goes through these sensitive periods, we call them developmental stages in pediatrics, but these sensitive periods in which the child is learning to come up with words, learning to use fine motor skills, gross motor skills, language, math, all these different periods where if you observe the child closely, scientifically, you can capture all these things. So what she wanted to do in her method of education was to say, okay, let's respect how the child develops, and let's create an environment that meets the needs of that child, that's meeting the needs of that child at these important developmental stages, these sensitive periods. And through my training and through my experience of doing this and messing up over and over and over again as a 3 to 6 year old teacher, that got ingrained in me, that interaction with understanding the development of the child and knowing how much the environment can enhance that developmental process. So fast forward, I go to medical school, I decide on pediatrics, but I also decide that pediatrics doesn't seem like it's enough for what I want to do. I also want to learn about how the mind is developed and how the mind can also kind of go astray a little bit and cause issues. And so that led to my going into pediatrics and child psychiatry and doing a combined fellowship or residency here at the University of Utah. But even through that process, as I became more aware of how the environment can help, it also became quite obvious how the environment can harm. And I think that's where this issue of wanting to learn more about trauma, wanting to learn more about how do children become impacted and how they respond and how they can become resilient and get back on track. That led me to child abuse pediatrics because I wanted to know fundamentally in this most narrow population, how do children receive that trauma? How do they initially respond to trauma? How do they long-term wise respond to trauma? How can we best help them after they've been traumatized? And as I kind of had this wonderful opportunity of education to move forward, it's really led to some wonderful, eye-opening, and very, becoming very humble with what I can do and what I can understand and how I can help. And I think that from that humility, a child psychiatrist or a pediatrician, either one, works with a lot of kids And they become that one, the pediatrician, the bearded, white-haired pediatrician walks into the room and they can know all the developmental stages, they know all the next things that the kid's doing. The child psychiatrist has that same feel with understanding dynamics. Being able to spot that depressed kid a mile away and ask that perfect question. But what I've found with trauma, and I really am starting to kind of hone on this as kind of a mantra, is that the more I learn about trauma, the less I can just say, oh, that's trauma right there. I think that, and I think this is clinically, this is our experience too. Like, we all know what that depressed kid looks like. That depressed teenager who we're sitting across from in our office. They're down like this, they're not making eye contact, short answers to questions. We all know what that really anxious 9-year-old looks like. Fidgety, tap, 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 tap. Quick, short answers, very, trying to please. Every answer is positive. Oh yes, that sounds great. Oh yes, I'll try that. Oh yes, I'll do this. But the more I work with the whole spectrum of individuals who experience trauma and their families who also share in that experience, is that range of what a traumatized child looks like goes from the stereotype, the what we see on the movies, the on alert, on edge, ready for anything, to really more often than not, you seem just fine. You look just fine. I can have a nice conversation in a calm environment with a kid who has significant PTSD. And if I'm not asking specific symptom-related questions, looks like a normal kid to me. And so that's really what's led us to some of the work that we're doing. And I just want to share very quickly 2 of the statewide projects that we're involved with, because of that ongoing sense that, I study this and I work with experts at safe and healthy families and primary children who know trauma, and still we get fooled every day in terms of who really is suffering and who isn't. So the first project that I want to share with you very briefly is one that is in collaboration with Tracey, also with the Office of Victims of Crime, also with Intermountain, also with Select Health. It's a project where we are developing a standardized approach for pediatric providers, frontline pediatric providers, and we're using 2 main groups to start with: primary care settings and CJCs, because these are 2 of the places where we see kids most often who experience traumatic events, and giving them a simple, straightforward, standardized tool and approach and decision support so that they can know which kids who are suffering from significant traumatic stress and are most in need of evidence-based trauma services. It's kind of akin to a Vanderbilt for ADHD or a PHQ-9 for depression, but unfortunately it's more complicated than that. And what we've tried to distill it down to is that addressing trauma is as easy as 1, 2, 3. And so our method basically looks at these 3 principles. 1, is there anything from a safety standpoint, DCFS calling, do we need help? Do we need support to make sure that this child is safe? Second, and this gets to another thing that Brent touched on, is there a concern for suicidality? Because we know that suicide is all too often overly simplified with just depression, when really suicide risk is related to distress. And PTSD, anxiety, other significant psychiatric issues, or non-psychiatric, just distress, is significantly related to suicide risk. And so before we even get to this whole issue of does the child need trauma treatment, we first take a breath and say, is there a concern for suicide? And then third, we're using a brief measure to help delineate which kids are experiencing trauma but overall not having significant trauma symptoms, and which kids, but probably still look good, and which kids are having significant trauma symptoms, whether or not they look good. And those are those kids that we really want to say, hey, there are things out there like TFCBT, like EMDR, like CFTSI, that can really be helpful for kids who've experienced something just like what you have and are having the same type of responses that you're having right now. So that is something we're in the second year of a 5-year project for that. so appreciative for all of the efforts and the collaboration that's gone into that. And I'm hopeful that, as we move forward and we're doing this in Utah County and the CJC there, we're learning so much from our community partners. This is truly a development process where we're developing this from the ground up. So I'm very excited to share that with you all. The second one that I want to just briefly mention, because Brent's here and it's really important and it's trauma related, is that we are just about to start the third year of our pilot project for providing oversight for children who are in DCFS custody, who are in foster care, who are receiving psychiatric treatment. And it gets back to this whole thing of, when you see it, and we know that our practitioners in the community know about trauma, especially if it's a kid that's in foster care. But just because you know it when you see it, it doesn't necessarily mean that's what's driving your treatment. In the state of Utah right now, there's about 3,000 kids, more or less, that are in state's custody, they're in foster care. Of those kids, about 20%, or about 600 of those kids, are on 2 or more psychiatric medicines. I don't know what the rate of psychiatric medications among kids in Utah County is, but I know it's less than 20% of all kids in Utah County are on 2 or more psychiatric medicines. That's a lot of medicines. And in our group, we actually have a significant group, about 100 kids are on 5 or more psychiatric medicines. Now sure, it's written all over the chart. Oh, the kid was abused. Oh, there might be PTSD. But clearly, from a systems issue, there is a gap in terms of how is the system taking a trauma-informed approach, thinking about how does trauma interplay with how the child is presenting, how do transitions play with how the child's presenting, and are we using medications to really help that child, or are we using medications as kind of a, I don't know what else to do, I'm seeing a foster family that's struggling, a child that's struggling. I don't know how the system's going to respond in a trauma-informed way, so I'm just going to throw more stuff. We're just going to add and add and add. This is not unique to Utah. Most states have programs like this, but with Brent's incredible advocacy and support, we were actually able to get the legislature, which we've been talking about very fondly, and for good reason, to support the development and the piloting of this program. And I'm very excited to work with a wonderful APRN, Stacey Madden, who is the leader, she's our manager of the program. I have a co-director, Allison Nietzsche, who is a child psychiatrist at UNI. We have an infant child psychiatry specialist, Michelle Bowe. It is a partnership within the university, as well as Fostering Healthy Children and DCFS. We all work together in a trauma-informed approach to saying, okay, are all these kids getting what they're needing, and are there kids that are not getting what they need and instead are getting something else that frankly has potential side effects and long-term consequences for them. So really kind of just to sum up, my path is and I think just like all of you, sitting on the ground, playing with kids, and seeing how the environment, a good environment, is so incredibly helpful for children. And I think knowing that is what keeps us going when we have to be faced with families who don't have that luxury of such a good environment, and children who don't have that opportunity or have had gaps in that opportunity where they're faced with adversity, with trauma. And I think that's where it keeps coming back to for me, is that how do we acknowledge that children aren't broken. Children have developmental, there are adversities, there are traumas, but because they are continuing to grow, because they have these sensitive periods, we have that opportunity to intervene, to keep them safe, to make sure that they're not going to harm themselves, and to provide them the resources they need so that we can get them back on track. It's really kind of taking Maria Montessori's approach and applying it to a trauma-informed world. Understanding that children are developing and that as we modify their environment for the better, the children will naturally respond. So I appreciate Brent for letting me be a part of this, and I'm going to cut myself off there. Thanks.
Okay, so we have about 45 minutes, but let me just say, thanks to each of you. And can I just, Deondra was talking about how classical music has helped her. Thanks to BYU for keeping the classical musical station, right? Oh, I was listening to it on the way down here. It's very therapeutic, so I just wanted to plug that. That was great. Okay, so we have the mics. Great, Mike and Mike. All right. And so if you have questions, raise your hand. Oh, we have a question down here. We have two down here. One on either.
We can also repeat the question if you're close enough to us.
So if you don't have a mic, they'll repeat the question. And let the panelists know, let them know who you're asking the question to. So just Deondra or Tracey or Brent.
I'm not quite sure who.
Or all of them.
My question fits in the realm of the awareness. And I'm wondering if studies have been done. Is that on? Closer.
There you go.
Oh, okay.
Hold it closer, yeah.
Okay.
Good job.
So my question is, are there statistics, have studies been done on how often the perpetrator of sexual abuse is a woman? Because we have a stereotype that the perpetrator is male. And so I believe that it's underreported. I believe that children are left at risk because this is not always recognized. And even the victims will say that, particularly male victims, that I've heard quite a few that have said it was a female babysitter or an aunt or a sister, an older person, an older female anyway. I think some of the victims say it wasn't really that big of a deal. So are there statistics on this? Do you think there's enough awareness on this issue?
Go ahead.
So I don't know the specific statistics. I do know that sexual abuse is overwhelmingly perpetrated by men, but that women certainly are perpetrators of sexual abuse as well. And so I think, getting to the heart of the question, which is not letting our stereotypes or perceive what it is, what we think it should be, kind of dictate how we respond, I think is really critical. And understanding how do we educate children as to what is appropriate boundaries between adults and children and what are good touches and bad touches, so that all children, boys and girls, who may have been sexually abused by men or women, understand that this is not just kind of the stereotypical, this is that one piece. It's about what is private to me, what should and should not be touched, and who has that ability to do that. And I think when we get to that piece, when we think about broader education, which Deondra has certainly been very instrumental in pushing and making sure that children have access to that, then we don't have to worry necessarily as much about kind of what the rates are, as much as can we encourage children to know what is safe and not safe, boy or girl, and whoever the contact is, intrafamilial, extrafamilial, man, woman, so that we can have a safe environment where they are able to disclose when they are not feeling safe. And so then, we as a society, whether it's clinicians, whether it's DCFS, can respond appropriately.
I'm just going to add a couple of things. One, I can get information to Wendy. I know that we have had in recent years at do a big annual conference, we've had experts come in and speak to this issue specifically. So I can get the information on those experts that we've had come in. I will say, looking at the cases that we've seen in more recent years, I have noted a trend with primarily teachers. Female teachers and teenage students. And I would say that's probably really ramped up in maybe the last 5 or 7 years or so. I'm looking over at Kelly. I suspect you're kind of seeing the same trend in your center here. And we realized that we really did have to overcome a stereotype, because I remember someone saying to me, well, if you saw that scenario 20 years ago, you just call that young boy lucky. And so we realized then we do have some serious challenges to overcome in the culture, if you will, and helping them understand and see that child as a child and as a victim. And also recognizing that whether you're a teacher or a coach, or you do occupy a position of trust. So you immediately then have that imbalance of power. So I hope that helps to answer the question a little bit, but I'm happy to get more information to Wendy.
Gary, I think you have a question.
One of the more damaging aspects of trauma that we see is attachment ruptures and what happens in relationships. I'm wondering about how much attachment theory is woven into trauma training and the implications of that when it comes to public policy and treatment.
Well, I'm going to look at Kara, who's not on the panel. I wonder if that's something that you might be able to. Do you have a thought about that question at all? Sorry, Kara's going to present the last hour, but she's a clinical social worker. So is that okay, you guys, if I ask her?
Please feel free to check that too. I think when we think about that, this concept of trauma, especially a little bit about this next hour, that
Hold that mic a little.
concern. It can be anything really that impacts our functioning. So definitely in terms of attachment theory, relational ruptures or relational trauma can have that same impact.
I'd like to thank you.
Yeah,
Can I
sure.
just add on to that? So, one of the challenges we have is that the split within medicine is that the pediatricians see the kids under 3 and the child psychiatrists see the kids usually over 5, right? That's about the breakup. Who gets the training in attachment theory? It's generally the child psychiatrist more so than the pediatrician. The pediatricians live it, but I don't think they're getting formally trained in it. At least my pediatric training, there was not a lot of Bowlby or Ainsworth or any of that kind of stuff. That all came from child psychiatry, but we're seeing kids who are 6, 7, 10, 12, 14 years old. So we're understanding the origins of this, but we're not there in the front lines when it's so meaningfully, you can be doing things from a meaningful standpoint. First 1,000 Days was an AAP, Utah AAP sponsored event. Bill Cosgrove, who was the past chair of the Utah Academy of AAP, Utah Pediatrics Group, whatever that's called. Really was a leader in bringing that together and was working towards giving pediatricians more formal awareness and understanding about attachment, because as opposed to a 2-year-old having PTSD symptoms, most of their trauma symptoms are really manifest in how they are not managing their appropriate attachments with their primary caregivers. And so we actually took part in that and worked on using some evidence-based principles from some models, specifically child-parent psychotherapy and parent-child interaction therapy, and making them pediatrician-friendly, so that we could try to start to translate some of these divides. So these wonderful evidence-based tools out there, and I'm not meaning to limit to those. I think circle of security is another wonderful evidence-based or evidence-informed and trauma attachment-based model. But I think it's important for us as clinicians who see attachment to be communicating and working with the pediatricians who are seeing the kids every year or every 6 months for well-child checks in those really formative ages, to translate that knowledge so that it's not just a matter of kind of, ooh, this gives me a bad feeling, but they can more formally understand, how do I get my clinician colleagues involved? How do we kind of branch some of these things? A couple of things that have happened within pediatrics. Reach Out and Read was a program that was started in Boston about 25 years ago. Really enhancing literacy and school readiness among underserved kids. What did it show? If you do reach out and read, you're enhancing attachment. So yeah, they improve their scores, but so there's this undercurrent within pediatrics of they're doing a lot of these things, and I think they viscerally get it, but I do think that there is a strong disconnect, and they get ACEs. They get ACEs now, they get trauma now, but I still think we have a lot of work to do to figure out how do we relay some of our attachment theory and how children are developing and how that can enhance or delay some of their development through attachment mechanisms so they can more formally appreciate that. So I think it's a great opportunity for more work.
Okay, another question up here?
I have two questions for Deondra. I had heard either you or your sister helped pass legislation that gives schools the option to opt into a sexual abuse prevention training. And I wonder if you could tell me the name of that so I can ask my children's schools about it.
This was the first piece of legislation that I ever worked on. And when I got the call from Representative Romero, the bill's sponsor, this was, 2012? She said, the bill is almost dead. We need help advocating for it, and why the need is so prevalent that our teachers, our parents, and our children be able to receive this training, or at least the option of this training. And eventually the bill did pass with the help of a lot of amazing people that really advocated for the importance of not just our children being taught about sexual abuse prevention, but all the adults around them, the parents, the teachers, the bus drivers, the coaches, everyone that is interacting with our kids on a daily basis. So within that, we had to make a concession along the way, which I learned happens more often than not, that you have to be willing to look at the bigger picture sometimes, even if it really should pass the way you originally intended. It was, instead of an opt-in, it became an opt-out, which was a big fight, honestly. It's one word, but it sure makes a difference, a really big difference. In this last session, we refined some of the wording to make sure that there's a timeline every 2 years that schools are teaching sexual abuse prevention to the parents and the teachers, and then the children are the optional part. Eventually, we hope to go back and build upon it. The legislation as it stands right now applies to elementary schools. Our hope is to, now that a certain amount of educating has happened, now that it's in the school systems, to be able to build upon it and add junior high and high school. Hopefully, fears have eased over the 2 years, I think now, or a year and a half that it's been implemented in schools. The world is not ending. We, in fact, are giving parents tools to further these discussions with their children. I cannot tell you how many times parents have come up to me and said, what can I do to have these conversations with my kids? How can I approach this? What's the best way? And I feel like there's power in numbers. If our kids are hearing about it at school with us there, and we are then encouraged to discuss with them at home, that's just a more powerful impact that we're having on their lives. They will remember that we were a part of that process, and heaven forbid anything happens to them, they'll know that that communication is open with their parents, it's open with their teachers, and they'll have that support around them that they so desperately need.
Can I add something? Is that okay? So that was where this little team of rebels really solidified around that bill and rallying support and to it. So two things. Keep your eye on the issue, because about every year somebody will come along and try to kill it. So keep your eye on that. It's something you support. So keep your eye on that. Let lawmakers know that if you like it. And then if you're going to check with your kid about what they're learning, your child, check with the school to make sure they're doing it. Just let them know that you're a concerned parent. Anyway, so those two things. Keep an eye on the issue because it's not dead. And people would like to see it dead. Go ahead.
Yeah, and a lot of school districts are slowly trickling in to the knowledge that this, like I said, that this is not the end of the world. And so it's important for you to enforce within your own school district, as a concerned parent, as a concerned community member, that this is important to you. from what I've heard, the more your schools and school districts hear that this is something that needs to happen, the more they will continue to look into it and implement it. So it is law at this point, but since it's still fairly new, there's a process of making sure that everyone is on board and doing it in the proper way.
And of course, now I have to add something. Just the education, sex abuse education is not sex education. And that is one of the challenges that we face in making this mandatory and why it's been optional. And so there's a continuing education effort with lawmakers and other advocacy groups to help them understand there's absolutely a distinction. You can have this conversation with a very young child without ever introducing anything related to sex education. So again, if this is a topic you care about, as Brent said, watch it closely because those conversations do continue to come up about that concern.
Okay, and this is something you guys maybe can help me with. So one of the things we want to make sure is, are you wondering like what, I want to make sure you're asking the right question, right, of your administrators, like, what are they trying to find out? Like, we're trying to find out if they're offering the education, if they're offering the information.
What do we ask specifically if we want to simplify it?
So what would she ask specifically of her principal or her administrators?
Refer to the law. I don't, if you go to the Board of Education site, they have very specific, there was a process that I was able to be a part of where we dove into policies, we dove into specifics of what should be enforced in this education, and we made recommendations to the Board of Education of what curriculum providers would be approved, and they accepted our recommendations. So on the Board of Education site, you'll see the list of approved providers. There are many, and they all offer different things depending upon what may be important to a specific school or what may be important to a school district. So there's a wide variety, and so that might be the best resource. There's also individuals that are listed on the Board of Education site that you can contact, and it is their job to have those discussions with the school district and with individual schools to make sure that this continues to get enforced how it should be. So I would be diligent about reaching out on your own and both in tandem with relying on those that are staff at the Board of Education to help kind of further those discussions.
So I just pulled it up, Utah State Board of Education, and there's a document, Child Sexual Abuse Prevention, and they're talking about the bill, and they talk about what the requirements are, executive summary, background, et cetera, et cetera. So go to that website, and you can get a bunch of information on that.
And just ask, are you fulfilling the law by offering this to parents and teachers and hopefully children as well?
And they list the different approved programs as well. So just go to that website and get all the information you need. Okay, here's a question here, and then way up top. So do you want to go, and then when she gets up there, the person up top next. Go ahead.
So Tracey and Brooks, you both mentioned, and I did not get the acronym, but it was CSBTI or CFTBI or something. Can you please explain that?
Which acronym?
It's one of the worst acronyms out there, it really is. So CFTSI stands for Child and Family Traumatic Stress Intervention. Can you move it? And very briefly, this is the 90-second spiel. So it is a family-based PTSD early intervention / prevention therapy for children who have recently experienced a significant traumatic event or have recently disclosed sexual abuse, even if the sexual abuse was more remote. It's generally 4 to 8 sessions in length. The sessions are kind of built out where you first meet just with the family, the parents. The second session you meet part with the child and then part with the parents. And it's all focused around the child's experience of traumatic events and the child's trauma symptoms. And what, by the second session, what you do is you basically ensure that the family is aligned with having a shared understanding of what the child's traumatic experiences are and what the child's most pertinent and most difficult traumatic stress symptoms are. And then the rest of the sessions really are about having a shared understanding of what are we going to work on and choosing like one thing to say, okay, we're going to try to help with this child's sleep problems that are directly related to their trauma. We're going to do something, we're going to try that this week. And getting a shared understanding of that, and come back the next week, how is that working? Is it making things better or worse, the same? And then you either continue along that path or you do something else, depending on the child responding. When we piloted this program at Saving All the Families, in kids who we generally would have done TFCBT for, so trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, we found that about 30 to 40% of kids who we otherwise would have done 16 to 24 sessions of TFCBT, we could get out the door doing well in 4 to 6 sessions. And so I think it's a very important tool to have in the toolkit, and I'm so glad that the AG's office has been moving forward to work with Yale to bring it out here, to have it in the CJCs. It's not the end-all be-all. So you still have to have therapists who can do the full trauma therapy, because it's not a matter of failing CFTSI. It's really a matter of, okay, so these symptoms are more ingrained, they're more than we can accomplish in 4 to 6 sessions. We need to then move forward with that exposure and that cognitive processing to really get the kid back online. But I think it's a wonderful opportunity, and I'm so glad the state is moving forward with it.
And then I think Wendy was just telling me, and Brooks, you can confirm, but if you go to the NCTSN website, nctsn.org, they should have information on, there you are, on that model. So go to that website. And then doesn't it feel like we're talking about crime shows? It really does. NCIS, NCTI, no, it does. Anyway, okay, up top, somebody has somebody. Question.
Yes, thank you, Brent. I'm just wondering if any of you are familiar, I guess, with the concept of post-traumatic growth that's proposed primarily by Tabet and Calhoun, but others as well, and how you might see that fitting into a kind of a traumatic, trauma-based overview or trauma-based viewpoint.
Yeah, not me. Go ahead.
So I have been fortunate to see individuals and meet individuals who've experienced post-traumatic growth, and you know, I think that in some ways it's a miraculous occurrence that we don't fully understand. You know, the way that I conceptualize post-traumatic growth is that we have established pre-functional baselines of what the child was doing prior to the traumatic experience. When that trauma occurs, functionality decreases, and that is either short-lived, in that case it's resilience, or it's prolonged, in which case that's more of a protracted recovery phase. And this is coming from Chris Lane's work out at UCLA. I'm borrowing his work when I'm talking about this. When we look at post-traumatic growth, by definition, and I think this is kind of conceptualizing with other child trauma events, you end up with a level of functioning that is higher than the pre-trauma level of functioning. Okay, and so I think, you know, and I've gotten to hear folks who kind of were graduates of the foster care system who are now motivational speakers. You know, I don't know if I would put Deondra in this category of post-traumatic growth, because I think she was always going to be wonderful, and I think she got back on her baseline, and I give her and her family a lot of credit for doing that. But I think that you have folks who have this established poor baseline or mediocre baseline, and then after their trauma, they are at a much higher level. Our trauma-based therapies are designed to get you back to where you were. And so I think that that is one of the things that when we think about instilling post-traumatic growth, I have been fortunate to be along for the ride with some folks who have that, but I can't say that I did anything to foster that I was going through the processes that we have. I think it's an area that we really should learn more from to see what's in those pieces that kind of contribute to that, because we don't understand it very well, but I do think that it's a phenomenon that is wonderful. The one thing that I do want to suggest, and I think that this might be, is that the post-traumatic growth from a treatment standpoint and from an expectation standpoint. Like, our goal as clinicians is to get families back to where they were. And if they're able to enhance so that things go beyond that, I think that that's wonderful, but I would hate for us to look at post-traumatic growth as a goal, when in reality, that happens sometimes and it's wonderful, but I'm not sure that we're really doing more than just being along for the ride with that.
Question? Oh, over here.
Thanks for being here. I was just curious what your thoughts are on trauma, all this trauma-informed care efforts and false memories. Do you have any thoughts?
I'll bet there are thoughts on that. Who wants to take that question?
I told you we rely on Brooks a lot. We all look to Brooks as our resident expert.
Which do you want to cut? Like, there's two big topics there. Yeah. False memories and trauma-informed care are its own. So
false memories more. So what your thoughts are on that in this arena?
So tell me more about that. What would you like us to talk about with them?
Maybe their I guess how you deal with them, their prevalence, just being mindful of them. Are they real?
So I know where to go with that. Then thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. So Tracey, I'm going to kind of talk about her for a second. The level of quality that is done within the CJCs, the amount of effort it has taken to make sure that we are doing forensically informed training, so the fit-based model for doing forensic interviews, it is incredibly high, and I think the state of Utah needs to be incredibly proud of themselves for what they're doing with that. The reason why there are manuals, there are methods for interviewing children, especially young children, is because people were concerned. Are we instilling false memories in the kids? Are we kind of eliciting things that aren't really true, and therefore also putting people unjustly behind bars? And there were some awful examples, especially in the 80s, of these scenarios where kids were asked really leading questions that led to really bad cases happening and really, travesties of justice. What I would say is a couple of things. One, in the state of Utah, when folks are being interviewed at CJCs, which is why we need kids to go to CJCs, they are in general receiving very high-level interviews that significantly decrease the risk of any type of false reporting or instilling false memories into children. There is a lot of evidence. Tom Lyons was just here a couple of months ago speaking the praises of Utah in terms of how much effort, and he's a world-renowned forensic interviewer expert. So I think that that's a really important thing to say, is that when you have a child who discloses sexual abuse, for example, the positive predictive value or the chances that that child was actually sexually abused is incredibly high. Incredibly high. Well over 95% of a positive predictive value when there's a disclosure for sexual abuse. So that's not to say that there aren't false disclosures, and our law enforcement and DCFS are aware of this, and they use forensic interviewing techniques to help tease out when there's concerns that maybe this was kind of a false allegation, or maybe someone instilled a memory that wasn't quite accurate in the child. But starting at a baseline of there's been research to show that the rate of false accusations for sexual assault is akin to the rate of false accusations for other crimes. It's actually not any different. And that rate is somewhere between like 2 to 3%, I think, is what the national statistics are. So the great majority of people who disclose are disclosing truth. And so I think from a trauma-informed perspective, going back to the other part of the question, we accept people for where they're at, and we work with them on the assumption, and I think the rightly founded assumption, that when they're describing sexual abuse, that it happened. And that if there are inconsistencies with their story, it is much more likely that those inconsistencies are related to the experience of sexual abuse, and the ways that we cope with getting through sexual abuse and how long ago it was and other factors than actually evidence that this is actually a false or implanted or other type of inconsistent memory. And so I think starting from that standpoint and knowing how much effort and resources are put into making sure that we're not accidentally doing that with children, I think are two critical points to think about, and then kind of recognizing that there's always going to be cases that you think about late at night and are kind of wrestling with. You know, that's always going to happen, but overall, the great majority of all disclosures are true.
I'm just going to add to that. Thanks for the shout out, Brooks, about the way we interview kids. And it never surprises people when we talk about our medical response or even our mental health response being driven by science. I think it's still a surprise to some people to understand how much science drives our forensic interviewing techniques. And Brooks mentioned specifically Tom Lyon as one of the experts we look to. He's out of UCLA if you want to Google him, which I would encourage you to do because he's just done some fascinating research. But one of the leading experts, not just in the country, but actually in the world, is right here in Utah, and we were fortunate enough to hire her within our program about 6 months ago, Heather Stewart, and she's actually the developer of the curriculum that we use now in most of our CJCs, and it's very closely tied to the curriculum developed by Tom Lyon that I know is used here in Utah County. So there's a really close relationship between those two curricula. And it really reflects the evolution in this field and the types of questions that we need to ask to elicit rich narrative from children, which is a dramatic departure from the way that we used to ask questions, which were typically yes, no, very directed, very closed. But this line of questioning does alleviate that concern about there being false memories. And Heather, I have to tell you, is crazy busy since we have brought her on because one of the things that she can do for multidisciplinary teams is look at an interview and provide them some guidance about that child's disclosure and provide the prosecutor guidance about the disclosure. And then should that case go to trial, provide serve as an expert witness for the prosecutor in that case. Because certainly the defense counsel has their own experts. And so we've watched this field in particular just come leaps and bounds in probably the last 15, 20 years. But I wanted to note that the position we've created now in our state program, we were told was kind of the first of its kind in the country. So we're very excited about that.
I know DCFS, their child protection workers are also trained in these models because, I mean, they know they have to, the information they get. I mean, I guess it goes to the Children's Justice Center as well, that approach where several, people can be involved and so when questions are asked, it's law enforcement is there, psychologists, lots of people are there to make sure that the questions are appropriate, they're not leading, that's going to hold up the court, blah, 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 because it really, whatever the 2% or 3% out there that we're not getting the right information, the fact is the focus is on these kids and making sure that they are receiving the help and the support and the resources they need. And I got to shout out really to everybody here. I mean, it's the collaborative effort that's in place, and it has been in place for many years to make sure that DCFS and the CJCs and law enforcement, that we're all in sync with our approach with how we interview these kids. It's really impressive. So. Okay, question? Right? Okay.
Okay, my question is for Tracey, mainly about the CJC. I am wondering the medical exam that victims go through at the CJC, is it a standard exam for all victims, or is the abuse that they have had a part of the criteria? Is there levels of criteria? The reason I ask is I have a 6-year-old female who had an exam that was much more invasive than her original abuse, and her mom was quite traumatized because she had tried to find out what would happen at the CJC to prepare her daughter, and what she got and what actually happened, she felt was a big difference. So I'm wondering, just so that I can prepare people going there a little bit more, depending on, is there a criteria, is it the same? If you can kind of educate me on that.
And I'll speak generally to that, and then I may look to Brooks for some of that as well, because of his affiliation with primary children. There is absolutely criteria, and it's why we have our medical providers integrated into the team, looking at what the disclosure is, so we don't examine unnecessarily. And so you will have many cases where an examination is not required. And I know that our providers are trained with great care to explain to families what to expect, because our goal is for the experience to not be invasive and to be as comfortable as it can for the child. So I'd welcome an opportunity to maybe, if you have a moment after we wrap this up between the break, to talk to you a little bit more, find out more specifics. If you can share those with me, because that's something that we really do try to attend to. We have national standards around every aspect of what CJCs do, from the medical exams to forensic exam interviews to mental health standards, and so everything is done with the intention of minimizing trauma. That is our goal, and not introducing new trauma into that child's experience.
Okay, so we have about 5 more minutes, and then Wendy will come up and tell us next steps. So 5 more minutes, 2 more questions. Right down here, right below you. There you go.
I have a question for Deondra. I'm curious if you could speak to this, but what was it that helped your sister to come forward and talk to you? And what do you think could have helped you to come forward earlier? And I'm wondering if maybe that's why you have such a focus on education early.
Thank you. I think what prompted her to come forward and ask me about it was the fact that we were, like I said, we knew so much about each other, but there's a certain amount that it hovers more above the surface level. And I think because the circumstances were right at the time. We were sharing a hotel room, which we never do, so I think it was meant to be. And we were talking more in depth about the course of our lives. And she wasn't willing to just let it go. And I think about that aspect pretty much every day. Sometimes we ask that question and we get, oh, no, everything's fine, and then we just let it go. And the importance of continuing to ask, is everything okay? Are you scared? Or, these types of questions to really build that trust. And I knew with her that she really cared. And that's why when I was asked to legislate for sexual abuse prevention education, that was honestly one of the biggest reasons why I agreed to do it, to speak out really for the first time about it, was because I felt like if I had received that training in school, I am nearly certain that I would have come forward. And if I had been surrounded by people who understood what trauma is and the effects of it, and had gained my trust in such a way, I would have told them. And so I look at this next generation of kids growing up, and I'm determined to do everything I can to make sure that they're prepared in a much better way than I was. To even more importantly, make sure that the adults, myself included, understand trauma, understand the effects of it, and what we need to do to help minimize that for our children. And so, it's become an important part of my life just because I feel like there's so much, we have so far to go still, but the fact that we're here talking about it, the fact that we can be up at the Capitol talking about trauma and trauma-informed care, and people don't look at us like we're crazy. Like, there are huge things happening, even within the time that I've been involved working legislatively with different organizations. I feel like people are not only talking, but they're working together in a way that was not necessarily the case when I stepped into this 7 years ago. We're realizing the strength in numbers, and people in communities are understanding that trauma is something that needs to be discussed. We're not just talking to people within this realm, people who work with child abuse issues. We're out there talking to community members. We're out there talking to faith leaders. We're out there talking to teachers. And because of that, we'll have a common language that everybody understands, and we can all work together to hopefully help make a difference for the next generation of kids.
Okay, one last question. Two last questions. Both on this side.
Okay, really quickly. As practitioners, we know that trauma is multifaceted, meaning, trauma is just one of other things going on. And so, my question is more on what are your thoughts on being able to be sensitive or manage all these issues? For example, I work with Latino populations that may or may not have legal documentation in this country. And so when sexual abuse does come up, and I'm talking from an agency that maybe is not quote-unquote trauma focused, there obviously you're talking about fears of deportation, you're talking about the breaking up of a family system that is currently trying to make it with the father working, and if that's the alleged perpetrator, breaking up that system, amongst other things. And the fear of disclosing because of all those things and the fear of the law. What are your thoughts on that? Being sensitive or approaching those situations in a place that isn't, there are not specific guidelines or the practitioners on. And obviously we have a mandate to report. So I mean, with that in mind, how do you go about it?
So, brief answer. Is it up?
I'll just say very briefly that I think evidence-based trauma approaches take into account all of life circumstances and stressors when addressing trauma. And so, in these types of situations, we care for families where in our center, we do not ask for immigration status. I think that there's an important context to be aware of when delivering trauma-informed care. Part of the 12 core concepts of trauma that you were mentioning is that trauma is inherently complex. And another core concept is that trauma leads to other adversities, and other adversities impact how trauma impacts the child. And so I think conceptualizing that something is disclosed that's traumatic, not as bad as I think it should be impacting this child, but this child's doing very poorly, looking at the family circumstances and situations and thinking about all the added stressors, not just on that child, but on the parent unit as well, and how that's amplifying that child's reaction is a critical piece. But also when developing a treatment plan, thinking about those trauma core concepts and thinking, how do I do not just a treatment plan that makes sense from an evidence-based standpoint, but is realistic in actually meeting the needs of this family given their current circumstances. So I think it's an awareness and a humility to put everything on the table to say, I don't know what's best for this family beyond, I now know I'm a mandated reporter and I need to involve the appropriate authorities to make sure this child's safe. But as we form this treatment plan, I need your help and guidance to know how do we take all the other stressors that are going on in your life and we come together in a treatment plan, a pathway forward that actually not only addresses the trauma, but also makes sense in the context of all the other things that's going on in your family.
And I would just add, obviously we focus heavily on abuse because that's largely the work that we do, but I know with a lot of the training that we do and the internal discussions we have, we're looking at those broader traumatic experiences. And it may be the, the sudden loss of a loved one, or
a non-abusive, violent experience that we want our practitioners and our team members to always be mindful of. And I would just add finally is that we also want our team members to be aware of their own personal traumas and secondary trauma by virtue of the type of work that they do and how that can impact you on a day-to-day basis. So again, it is that much broader picture and it's looking below the surface that we're just encouraging you to do.
Okay, so can you ask your question after, during the lunch? Or we just need to get going, and I apologize for that. So, okay, so Wendy, first of all, thanks again.
I just want to say thank you. This is totally inadequate, but I think that's what we're used to as practitioners, right? And truly, honestly, a huge thank you to the four of you for the work you do and for being willing to share.